This is a special meeting of the Riverside Unified School District's Board of Trustees. And I think I will ask Mr. Hunt to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Thank you. Think about all our students that are in armed services to join me and ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. All right. We are seeking public input for items not on the agenda, and I have not received any cards, so I'm assuming there's nobody in the audience that would like to speak to anything not on the agenda. Okay, moving along. We're going to move on to our first agenda item. This is our interim superintendent's announcements. Do you have anything, Mr. Fine, other than? Okay. Then we'll move right into the heart of the study session. It's the latest update on the LCAP, and I'm going to stop talking and just give it over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lock-Dawson and members of the board. Good afternoon and welcome back to spring break. Although it's still going to be a struggle if the weather stays the way it is. It's going to be spring every day between now and the last day of school, which is going to be a struggle for everybody. We are kind of moved to the next phase of the LCAP process, and so I want to kind of review where we left off a couple weeks ago on the 25th with you and giving you what kind of amounted to the final of several points of background information and input from our community, from expert panels, from data that you had in your notebook with regard to different performance metrics and with regard to reviews of existing plans. And so we have completed really what is now the first of the kind of 5 blocks of time up there. We've completed the first 2, and we're really in this March-April time period where the task that's ahead of us is to actually draft the local control and accountability plan. And so you'll recall that the work that we presented to you back on the 25th of March with Special Services for Groups and Gina Airy was about, we reviewed with you the collection of our stakeholder data, and we reviewed with you the analysis that came out of that and gave you a 50 or so page summary of both the process and a summary of the actual analysis that was done. The next step really is to interpret, and that's what we're going to kick off tonight, is this interpretation phase where you really consider the input that you've received, and it's not just limited, certainly, to the stakeholder input, but limited to all the input you have, including your own personal input into this process, and that we then listen carefully and begin to look for some common interest and to begin to formulate those goals, those specific actions that we'll want to take to accomplish those goals. And that's really the task that's ahead of us for the month of April to ultimately pull those pieces together. And so we left you on the 25th with this slide that talks about interpreting the data and questions for your consideration. And basically that is, what are the identified needs that you're aware of, that our stakeholders identified, that the expert panels identified, that our existing plans were designed to address, and those top areas of needs for all students. And what are the actions and services? That's really a secondary step to all of this. We really want to focus on those goals and those needs, and then we will help you identify some actions and services that would help meet those goals and needs. And certainly, as we've talked all through this process, a focus not only on all students, but also specific subgroups of students, including foster youth, low income, and English learners. And so our real goal for tonight is to hear from each of you. It is really your time to reflect on the inputs you've received up to this point. And tonight is really a time for you to talk and to share. And so how you structure that is completely up to Mrs. Dawson and Lock-Dawson and the board with respect to sharing out your reflections, and then a time to clarify those reflections with questions and answers among yourself. And the goal certainly also tonight is for us as staff and others involved in this process to listen carefully, to kind of take your temperature, if you will, on where you're at with some of the concepts that have been provided through the input process, and also to kind of conclude the evening by getting your permission for where there are some common themes, some common thoughts and reflections on your behalf, to take those and begin to work on those and come back to you on the 21st with some of those common ideas and themes fleshed out a little bit more and some meat around them so that you can also react to those as well. And so those are really our goals for tonight. I want to remind you, and I've shared this information with you previously, but certainly want to consider all of the input you've received from our existing plans, the panels, the baseline data, and the stakeholder input, which was the last piece of data that we shared with you. We are interested in seeing what needs really kind of flow to the top, and to begin to isolate those. And that's in part so that we can move on with helping you craft some goals around those and craft some actions around those. And so we want to support you to identify, once you've identified the goals, if you will, we would support you in identifying actions that we can take to help achieve those goals. It is important in this phase of the conversation, I think, that you focus on the goals and the needs, not the actions, and try to separate those, because the actions are kind of secondary. They will come along here in the coming weeks as we work with you on this. Also encourage you to put the needs in your own words. And from our analysis of the stakeholder input, we created 30 topics and put those into 7 key themes. Those terms, the way we described them, may not be something you're comfortable with, and so encourage you to use your own words to do as you reflect, not necessarily exactly what is before you. And then our goal really, although we described it as the top 3 from each of you, certainly not limited to 3 by any means. That was simply a way to get started. And our task this evening in listening to you is to look for those common elements, and I'll repeat those back to you as we, at the end of the evening, as we identify those. So with that, actually I don't want to go there. With that, that's where we're going to stop. And Mrs. Locke-Dawson, really return it back to you and how you would like, you want to pick on the most prepared person or the least prepared, or take them in alphabetical order, however you as a group want to do that. But we at this point just want to listen. We'd be happy to answer any questions or clarify anything along the way, but our task tonight really is to listen to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fine. I took to heart your suggestion that you were looking for 3 top needs, and that's what I did personally. I looked at our plans, and I looked at what the community input was. I did want to, before we get started, ask if Gina, I don't want to put you on the spot, but as we were leaving last time, you said, if you give us those top 3, this is what we'll do. That's really what we need from the board so that we can move forward. Do you remember talking about that to me?
I said what we do with it?
Yeah, and you just sort of, I thought you articulated it very well. You just said, you said why you needed to hear the board's, what are, and if you don't want to, it's fine.
I'm not quite sure.
Okay, you just said how you were going to incorporate the information and how you would take it forward from there. So that's what I just, we were standing down on the bottom there, and I thought you did a nice job articulating.
Very good.
So.
I'll see if I can think back prior to spring break, right? That's always hard. I think what we were saying was that if we can hear these top needs.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
I think what you have to say is important, and Mr. Lee had to step out for some reason.
I didn't even notice he left. Sorry, I was looking at Gina.
I just said, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe he's tired. Sure, we can take a recess until Brent returns. Let's do that for just a moment. So.
I think what she's going to say is
Yeah. Okay. So just take a few moments, Mrs. Cloud and Mr. Hunt, to review what we'll say. So we'll just take a 5-minute recess till Brent returns. Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. All right. Really, seriously, my head is just not in the game, as I told Mr. Hunt earlier today. Coming off of spring break and Palm Springs, just not a good combination. I did want to say, as Mrs. Cloud pointed out to me, thank you, Mrs. Cloud, that Mrs. Alavey is on a trip out of the country, and it was long planned before this meeting was established. So, I just want to make sure everybody knows that she sends her regrets, and I think she may have been in communication with Mr. Fine via email from where she was with her priorities. All right, Mr. Lee is back, and so we will continue with the meeting. Thank you, Ms. Airy.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Loch-Dawson, you mentioned that at the end of our last study session, I may have said something about why it was important to talk about top needs. As Mr. Fine said, we're transitioning to this point of the process where we're actually developing the local control and accountability plan. And that means we want to help you to think in terms of the structure of the actual template. So when Janelle Kubinik was here, she started to introduce you to that template. In the second main section of the template, everything is cued off of needs. So the goals that you'll see after we respond to the needs that you say, the goals that you see will be cued off of those things. So we want to start to have a dialogue that's focused on top student needs. We wanted to purposely start to model our thinking where we start to put things together in the structure. You'll actually see them in the plan. So we've structured things in terms of how can our community and stakeholders address it, or how do our experts address it. Now we need to look at how will we be accountable for articulating what our goals are.
That was it. It was we were discussing the template and how that will sort of drive everything. So thank you. I appreciate that. So.
And I'll just add on, we do have Mrs. Alavey's comments, so whenever you'd like to incorporate those,
okay.
Mr. Fine can mention.
All righty. I think I'm going to let Mrs. Cloud go first, since she had indicated that she had her top priorities. Would you like to open the discussion, Mrs. Cloud?
Okay, I'll just throw this out. All of this was very interesting, and I think these are all things from the public to the board to the staff have talked about, and I'm just going to throw these out pretty briefly. And it's interesting because I looked at what principals said on the form that they filled out. Thank you for asking for that. I have talked to staff and teachers, and I always ask, what their thoughts are. So one of the things I think we need to consider is to simplify the bureaucracy, especially for those students like foster youth who are always, struggling to catch up to their next school and all of that. And I know that the law has impacted that, and we are supposed to be doing that. But I just want to remind us, because we have some gatekeepers at some gatekeeping staff at some places that don't make it easy for academic English learning parents and foster youth to get to the right person. I give you an example. I was at Target. I thought I needed one thing, which they don't carry anymore, as an electronic device. And the clerk that helped me said, no, we don't carry it anymore. You have to get it online. Well, a customer overheard, because I said what I needed it for, to upload pictures. And he said, you can use this other gadget instead. And I think they probably carry it. And so then the Target employee said, yes, we do carry it, and it's cheaper than the cord. It's $8. And I thought that was a perfect example. He answered my question, but he didn't provide the information I needed. And if the customer hadn't been there, when we left, my husband looked back and said, hire that man, the customer. If the customer hadn't been there, we would have left the store without the purchase. And we don't want to do that to our parents. We have to go beyond. So this is what I would encourage all staff to do. Go beyond, anticipate the questions and the things that they need, because sometimes the parents and the students don't even really know what they need. But after years of experience that many of us have, we do. So we should offer that without them having to dig it out from the staff. So, but the isolating the top needs of students, these are my three, and not any particular order with a lot of subgroups. We need to have the best teachers possible. Study after study shows, in fact, at when we went out to the sites, the students said, give us good teachers. We need to have the best teachers possible, high performing teachers, and we need to give them the kinds of staff development they need to be high performing, and they need to have high expectations for our students with no excuses. It just really bothers me when they kind of brush things aside. Oh, you know, those students. Because, as I said at one of the other meetings, poverty does not equate lack of intelligence. Secondly, we need to have good pedagogy and curriculum, which is concerning with the new Common Core. The curriculum part is a problem. And we need to have pedagogy that instructs student needs, and it understands that at the young ages we need to focus on literacy and math skills by third grade, which means a lot of particular direct instruction. And we need, this is what we get over and over again from principals and teachers, is sight help. We need, in these years of cutting back, we had to, you know, cut back APs and everything else. It's clear that we need district office staff and site staff. I mean, to me, that's instructional. District office site helps the sites, the school sites. So we have to keep that in mind. So we need that kind of help. We need APs, we need counselors, and over again, parents talked about, and students, the connection that we need to engage students. Well, those principals out there and those teachers, because because the culture is impacting the schools, so many of those students need extra help. And I feel bad that we have not been able to man the sites you know, to the degree that they need to be manned, especially with some of our larger schools. And with that, we also need to have literacy coaches or something, academic English language learner experts on site, maybe a roving teacher to especially help those K-3 students get a good start in education, which kind of all blends in with some of the things we've heard and some of the things principal said, and some of the things that are just downright common sense.
Thank you, Mrs. Cloud. I don't have any other lights, so I'm just going to start picking on people. Look, there goes Mr. Hunt's light. Okay, I'm going to pick on you, Mr. Hunt, now.
I figured you would. So.
Yeah, go for it.
Very good, Mrs. Cloud. I appreciate those comments. I think we need to be sure that whatever we're talking about here, we don't sound like a school district in Bloomington, Indiana, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or anywhere else, that it looks and feels and adapts to Riverside, that we're looking forward as to what life is. I really think we need a structure that, what I heard when I went was not so much this college and career readiness, but a system, an education system that is life readiness, adulthood readiness, that we're preparing, as we say somewhere around here, we're preparing young people to be successful adults. And that means taking a different kind of look at giving a firm educational foundation, but to begin to look at the reality of where young people's skills lie, where their opportunities lie. College was the right thing for my family, for my sister and I. We were the first in our family. College was the right thing for my girls. It isn't the right thing for everybody, and it's a trillion-dollar industry that's, in my opinion, trying to find its way in the future as well, because everybody from Bill Gates, who was a dropout, to my friend Stan Stossel, who's got a great career as an electrician, defies that you need to go to college to have a healthy, happy life. So I think we need to have a realistic plan that applies to Riverside, and real-life applications of learning. The idea of the STEMs should be expanded to be the ideas of career campuses, where we identify what are the careers, and we know, some of them are easy. I mean, there's the medical. We know with an aging population, medical is going to be there. There's always going to be need for plumbers and electricians. They haven't made any apps in Silicon Valley to replace those two yet, and other careers that would be beneficial. I think it's important that we don't look back on 2014 as, remember when we engaged the parents for that conversation we had? This should be the beginning and ongoing. We cannot say we're going to engage the parents and be credible unless we don't take a long overdue step on this board and in this district of televising our school board meetings and then asking staff and the industry, what else can we do to because if you look around, there's one person missing here today that's very important to our community, and that's the press enterprise. We're still a town with a newspaper, thankfully. She's not here. We know that they're not going to be reporting. And this is kind of an important meeting in a way. They're not going to be there. So it's going to be up to us to expand what Jackie Paul does and to expand how we communicate. To me, professional development is very important. And investing there. I also think that I know I'm not picking three, but I'm just going along on my notes. I believe that in the early ages, the class size reduction, though it's always been preached as unnecessary or at times or overwrought since I've been on this board, other things that I've been presented with counter that. So I believe K through 3, we should be looking at class size reduction. I also think in a community where we're 60% Latino, that we were overdue in starting it and we're overdue in expanding it. We should quadruple, I mean that quadruple, the number of elementary campuses that offer dual immersion. And we should look at a third language of growing economy and the biggest economic power on earth to be China, and look at Chinese as well. And I think we need to challenge some of our sacred cows. This always gets repeated wrong out in the district, but that's okay. I think we need to take a serious look at Lincoln, and to me, Lincoln is just a go along, get along program, and we need to challenge it and really give it the effort and the input and the tools that are needed to prepare those young people to be effective adults. I think that's some of our brightest kids in a way because they've seen what the other side can look like. No, I never had that kind of childhood that they've had, and here they are sticking to it, and I really admire those kids so much. We need to do more for them. And let's see, enrichment. Something I don't want us to skip is finding a way, and really, we all agree. Everything supports that being involved and the campus atmosphere we've talked about. We need to find a way to fund our enrichment activities. Not all young people can take advantage of them. We should find ways that they can, and whether we're beginning to move them into career, or college, or other. And I think we need to take a hard look at, when we take a hard look at Lincoln, Lincoln needs to be, that campus in particular, needs to be flipped back to an elementary school campus, which will correct the imbalance created by the board 50 years ago when their decision was to bus out instead of bus in. They bussed out minorities and they did not bus in whites, in a simple math. Lincoln, which used to be Washington Irving, I hope we can pick a better name, needs to be converted back to a elementary campus. We need to make a commitment to that. And I could see a Lincoln campus, quite frankly, at Grant, where it's surrounded by a hospital, surrounded by Office of Education, surrounded by lots of businesses downtown area that would be willing to participate in internships and trainings and things like that. We need to just not have any sacred cows. And I do believe that staffing is Mrs. Clouds pointed out, in our reduction we had to just cut. I think it was wise cuts. I think it was all well thought out cuts. I give Mr. Fine in particular credit for looking at that carefully. Before we put anybody back, and I think we do need to put back, I think there needs to be a process established that evaluates and then validates what that person is doing and why they're doing it and what's expected out of them. And that with changing technology that we continue to look at and reevaluate positions. This is the greatest, in the history of literacy, this is the greatest era ever today. We have more access to information, the masses do. And I think it's going to change the way some jobs can be done. And we learned that on a more simpler, but I think well-designed, and kudos to our people, are the way we've done our team cleaning. I think there's ways to do team things that are at the front counter. I know that isn't well thought out, but it's completely. But there are ways to centralize some of that. But we do need to bring some of those people back. So, and I believe strongly that we need to revamp our IB program. I think it's woefully fallen short. I think Mr. Fine's recent report on Norte Vista. I'm a Alvord kid. Norte Vista's program is what we should be aiming for, and it's 70-30 in the right direction, where ours is 30-70 in the wrong. And we need to re-challenge ourselves. I think we're living too much on some of our old laurels, and our young people expect more out of us than that, or need to expect more out of us than that. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, I'll have you go next. I'll finish up.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to sneak out of here because I left my iPad in the car, and of course it's dead. But I've gone over these notes quite a few times, and I just want to say, too, that we've mentioned it before on how valuable the input in the community was. And for me particularly, it was really reassuring because being the newest person up here and just participating in an election, the group of people that supported me and myself, we went door to door and asked these very similar questions, and we heard similar things. So that was, for me, was very reassuring to know that there is common themes and common patterns and common concerns. So I took Mr. Fine's direction to heart, too, with try to limit to 3 and then kind of expand that into subgroups. So I kind of picked 3 issues that I thought were prevalent, that were brought up, and that were also a concern of mine. And those three issues were the achievement gap, college and career readiness, and personalized learning. And I'll start with the achievement gap. I just finished reading a book called Multiplication is for White People, and it talks about the achievement gap and that exists in our schools that we're all aware of. And it talks, and this teacher who wrote this book talks about that the lack of achievement gap at birth. We're all born, we all have the same ability to achieve for the most part. So really it's an opportunity gap. So how do we address those opportunity gaps? And some of those solutions that were mentioned were preschool. And we have a lack of preschools here in the district that are available to low-income families. My wife and I, we have 2 kids, one's in preschool, and we wanted our son to be in a preschool, hopefully to learn Spanish, to continue to learn Spanish, and to be in a school that was going to be similar to the one that he will be in when he joins RUSD in TK. And we could not get him into any programs because they were all full. And there was no ability for a fee-paying parent to allow their child to participate in these preschool programs. So there is a clear need, I think, in this community to provide more opportunities for kids to be able to participate in a preschool, whether they can pay or they can't pay. And I think that if the district takes on that challenge, that our mission should be to make our schools, preschools, as diverse and open to all students, so that there is some continuity when they get up into the older grades. So I think an investment in preschool would be worthwhile, and I think that would help close that achievement gap and for our students who don't have access to preschool. Also has been mentioned class size. This is something that really resonated with a lot of people that I spoke with, especially in the younger grades, kindergarten through 3rd grade. One of the board goals, as we're all aware, is literacy. And if we can spend more time per pupil with the teacher, I think the chances of more students being literate are greatly enhanced. I know this is an expensive proposition, but I think the alternative is a lot more expensive. And last thing is under the achievement gap that I mentioned was community schools, looking more into that. I know we used to have one Mr. Fine had mentioned at Longfellow. There was recently an article in the LA Times about Los Angeles Unified School District that was fortunate enough to get a multi-million-dollar grant from the federal government to try this program out, and they've seen wild successes. So I think community school, where we can engage students and parents outside the classroom, is something that we should also look at. College and career preparedness. Counselors, both counselors like the counselors we have now to help students prepare for college, make sure they're on the right track, taking the right classes to get them to where they want to be, make sure they're making their goals, and then also the emotional counselors, social counselors, to make sure that students are supported emotionally throughout their education. To help address the early issues, I think that kind of add up and catch on to kids once they end up in college and they end up taking remedial classes. As we look to continue to hire the best and the brightest teachers out there, look for ways to attract and incentivize teachers with a background in math and science, so that we have not only the best teachers teaching our students the core curriculum in literature and history, but also math and science. If we can make sure our students are learning the basics of math in the very beginning of elementary, then we won't have as many remedial classes needing once they graduate from high school. And last thing I had mentioned was career, as Mr. Hunt also mentioned, about career technical education. Not every kid's going to go to college. I wish they would. Even if every kid wanted to go to college, there's not enough space for them to go to college. I think every child should have the opportunity to go to college, and I've said that time again, that it's important that we prepare every kid to be able to apply and get accepted into college. But for those students who choose not to, we need to have another alternative for them. And we heard a lot in the sessions about plumbers and electricians and auto mechanics, and I think that's important. But I think in today's world, that auto mechanic shop has changed, and we can look towards more technology-savvy careers and opening up kids' minds to possibilities that they might not be aware of. Creating an app, high-tech manufacturing, logistics, networking, those types of career fields, and making sure students understand the options that they have, that there are careers out there that they can support themselves and their families that don't necessarily require a college education. And the last bracket that I mentioned was the personalized learning. And under that, I had 3 subgroups, which was one was what we've been doing now in our classrooms and piloting through the Gates Grant is continuing that, providing more technology to our students in the classroom that they can take home and practice with and share with their parents and their siblings, as well as invest in more professional development for staff so that they're prepared to better instruct our students and find their strengths and work to those strengths. And then RUSD has done a lot of great things with this choice, the District of Choice, and allowing students to embrace what they're great at. If they have an affinity for language, then taking advantage of our dual language immersion. If they have affinity for science, then taking advantage of our STEM programs. And so expanding that, and I don't know if that's quadruple or double or triple, whatever that number is, but look to that. We have a great test case. We have a great study. We're offering kids choices, and they're taking advantage of them. If they're full, then we need to make more spots open to make sure those students are able to follow their path to be successful in our schools. And also look at maybe even, I know Mrs. Allaby has mentioned this, expanding the arts, maybe even creating a school, just like our STEM and our dual language immersion for kids and for the visual and performing arts as well. So that's all I have, President Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. I'm going to repeat some of what the other board members said, just because it's the same. I won't go into too much detail on it, but I too took that to heart to come back with 3, and basing it on what we've heard and what we heard in parent meetings and in public meetings. The 3 that I was looking at were our choice programs, making sure we have choices, and I'll couch these in kind of the same way Mr. Lee has. Our counseling, and also additional professional development. So those are 3 things I think our kids need. And I think they're the things that the parents need, and they touch on a lot of the different themes that were presented to us: pupil outcomes, parent engagement, student engagement, all those things. And the reason I chose those is because I really did think that the LCAP and Common Core are really emblematic of a desire to do things differently. I think the public has spoken nationwide and in our state and regionally and locally. It's really emblematic of a desire to really be nimble and responsive as a district and to do business differently. And for that, I think we need to be innovative. And so in our choice programs, I'm not going to say we need more dual language or we need more STEM, but I do think we need to be looking at what was successful about those programs and why they've been so wildly successful. This is consistently a need I hear from parents. We want to be able to choose what our kids' emphasis is, whether it's arts or language or those things. So, I mean, we need to be looking at things like partnerships with UC Riverside and community schools, or, you know, a 6-year high school, partnerships with businesses that kids come out with an AA and something. You know, dual language, an arts academy, something that's not just in high school, but that goes into our younger grades. Things where we're actually producing kids with some high-level skill and some excellence. So that was my thing on choice programs. Counseling, this is something that consistently kept coming up. I've heard from parents. As a parent of a junior in high school, academic counseling could be a lot better in our district. It just could be. I've said this again and again, and I don't want to throw our counselors under the bus because I think they are overworked and they have a lot of different things on their plates. I think they need to be helped in determining what their priorities should be and what they're reaching out and giving information to parents. It's just not sufficient. We had a big push to do A through G, and at least personally from my experience, you know, it was a lot of leading a lot of horses to empty troughs. They were told these are the classes you need to take, but then there wasn't necessarily the follow through on how to get into the schools of your choices. So I do think we need to look at what our counselors are doing and how we can help them do their jobs better and figure that out. Additionally, mental health counseling is huge. I think it's big and it hits on a number of our groups in need. There are different models of doing things. We can have, you know, just anywhere, our foster kids that need help, our LGBT youth that need help. We have so many different groups on campuses that I think could be assisted. Even our high school juniors that are ready to scream because they're taking so many AP classes and their SATs and that sort of thing. Any kind of mental health that we can support for these kids is important. And the third thing was professional development. And I think we need to see innovation at all levels. And this is part of doing business differently. Nobody should be afraid to speak up and make a suggestion. Common Core leaves the door wide open. LCAP leaves the door wide open for our teachers and our principals and our administrative staff to be as creative and interesting as possible in how they can assess needs and address them. So not just teachers, but I think professional development, even in our administrative staff and folks that need help in doing their jobs better too. So those are my 3 things. So I think we have a couple more comments from some of our board members. So we'll just kind of turn it over and have an open discussion on some of the topics we had. And I'll let you ask questions as well. Mrs. Cloud.
I want to piggyback on what you were saying. It's interesting because I was going to say this for my comments at the end, but it really fits now. I don't know how many of you saw the Education Next magazine article. Did any of you see it? I know several of our staff were quoted in it. It really touts RUSD and gives us a strong rah-rah for becoming a district of choice. It interviewed Mr. Walker, Mr. Robles. It talks about our dual immersion, our STEM schools. It just a lot of our folks and a lot of our parents at some of these schools were interviewed, and it just was a feel-good article. I felt good when I read it. So I'm going to ask Cheryl to copy it and give it to you. But one of the things, it's June Kronholz is the contributing editor and former Wall Street Journal correspondent. Yes, that's the correct word. She said, she asked about the administrative costs. Some of this was chopped off, so I can't get it all, but the gist is, if you have good programs, it's not what other districts are doing wrong, it's that we have options here. And when we began, 3 years ago, I think we began as a district of choice, it was a step out doing things differently. It was a step really like in the Indiana Jones movie, where you just step out and believe that you'll get the support that you need. And these programs that we stepped out with are so popular, they're being replicated. Mentioning the dual language immersion programs, the core knowledge program, STEM, it's just been amazing. So this is a really good article that touts Riverside Unified, because even though the state allowed us to become districts of choice, very few actually did. And it mentions the fact that even though we lost some students, that the District of Choice kind of gave us we didn't really make any money, but it kept us stable and kept jobs. And in the midst of a financial crisis, we took that opportunity to make lemonade instead of just talking about the lemons. So I would, give kudos to the staff and just for being creative, energetic, and getting ahead of the curve, because that's what this really did. Not that we don't have more work to do, because I think we all, if you take all of our comments, it'd probably make the whole picture. We all kind of focused on a different part of the elephant, and I think that's good. But this article will make you feel good, and it gives us credit for including the virtual school it talked about, for some of the things that we actually have done.
Thank you, Mrs. Cloud. I have not seen the article, so I would like to see it. Mr. Hunt, and then I think after Mr. Hunt, if you would like to maybe read Mrs. Alavi's comments into the record, we'll have those as well. Mr. Hunt.
I was going to add that when it comes to our employees, I agree with Mrs. Cloud talked about let's hire right, and I think I'm very pleased that our HR department's been, how they've been doing job fairs. But if they were a Fortune 500 company, they're probably number one, but the United States military, along with Israeli military and the British military, to name a few, spend an enormous amount of time of their people in training and education. I can just tell you, my dad's 24-year career, I remember when we were sent to Fort Riley, Kansas, of all cold places, it really was 2 years for my dad in training about incarceration and that part of the security side of things, which he was then had to do papers and help the Air Force set up their system better. I think that before we make a commitment too much to adding people, again, I just want to be careful that we make sure that the people we have are being given the training they need, and it's constant. But I fear too, unlike the military where, Dad was signed up for another 5 or 6 years, we can invest a lot in Teacher Smith, and then he decides to go Val Verde, unless we make sure, and as a district commit to, as part of this process, looking at our pay scale, looking how that we remain a competitive company in this region, that we are not going to lose someone, I'm picking on Val Verde, but to Val Verde or Corona Norco for the one factor of pay. It's going to be they had a better opportunity to move up, or et cetera, so forth. But I want people to want to work here and stay here because we invest in them, and that they have opportunity to move along, to create that kind of culture as well. that APs become principals, that principals become assistant superintendents, that they have those and other specialties. So I think it's very important we create that in-house company culture, that we're investing in our own, and we're constantly watching to be sure that we're competitive when it comes to pay and benefits and input, as you said earlier, having that ongoing dialogue, that they feel they have input. We know that workers all over, corporate America has done it for years. The Italians did it very well. The classic case of a tire company where they allowed the workers to actually sign their name on the tire. It was imprint. Once they did that, production went up, and kickbacks declined because people took a personal pride. And we need to have that kind of atmosphere. People want to work here, want to stay here, and know that we want to invest in them because they're the ones who produce the widget out. So,
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Mr. Fine, would you like to let us know what Mrs. Allaby had to say?
I'd be happy to. Thank you for asking. Mrs. Allaby's 3 items. The first is school climate, in which she includes counselors, more assistant principals with professional development, mental health, and A through G counseling. Number 2 is literacy by 3rd grade, or simply academic achievement for all by whatever means this takes. This may even mean preschool or other forms. And number 3 is enrichment activities, by which I mean investment in those engagement areas that suffer as a result of a lack of known ongoing funding source. And I include in this our sports, music, theater, and arts, which cannot be strong without some infusion of funds. Those were her 3 items.
And I would add to that, too. I think implicit in that is what she's saying. Whatever we decide is our priority, we need to make sure it's adequately supported through funding. I think that's the whole purpose of this.
That is the whole purpose, and I think that's key, because you talk about the good things that we've done the last few years. You have to understand that we did that in a time that we were also trimming 25 cents of every dollar. And so, take DLI as an example, and Michelle's not here, but Patty, I think they saw Patty. Patty's here, and others that led that effort. The criticism that we don't have enough Spanish language books in the library and all that, we have to understand the context in which we put that new program in, and its growth too. And so it's kind of, in some respects, falls in one of those categories that says we've got something great going on, but it's a little broken. It's the same with our athletic programs. It's the same with some of our music and arts programs. We didn't really cut those back. We've got great things going on, but there's broken pieces to them. Maybe there aren't enough stipends for our athletic programs, and so just some fine-tuning as opposed to a whole revamp. DLI would be a great example of a new one of those where we simply, if that's the right thing to focus on, we need to put the resources behind it that's needed, and that means across the board, from PD to the supplementary materials that we expect to have, and so on. And so those comments fit nicely in that analogy.
And I would guess I would ask if anybody has any questions of the board to come forward, or Mr. Fine or Ms. Airy, if you want to ask us. I think you've heard from us and you've heard what our priorities are. If you'd like to wrap up and let us know what next steps are, or Mrs. Cloud, did you want to?
I just have a question or a clarification for
sure.
Mr. Fine, actually, so I'm glad he's standing up there. I did look at what the principal said, and this falls under the curriculum and pedagogy and all of that. And, as I said in my comments, I'm really concerned about the Common Core curriculum, because there really isn't any. I mean, it's here, it's there, and
the curriculum versus the standards.
Yes. I've been a little critical. The standards aren't the issue for me so much, the standards themselves. It's what comes along with it, like the testing and the curriculum, the lack of curriculum. It's just being thrown at us. And so all of that, we're facing some real expenses coming down with just the form of our changing education. And all of these things are so exciting and fun, but they're all very expensive, most of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are expensive. And so I want you to help guide us through some of these things, because they are expensive. And one of the things that I mentioned to you earlier is some of the things with the Common Core state standards that concern me is activities and project-based learning. And the only reason I want to get that out there publicly is that I know that's a big part of the standards and all, and it has its place, but we went through that before, and it really detrimentally affects kids who don't have background knowledge, who are basically academic English learners. And I mean, as we were talking about science fairs and history day and all of that, benefit students more who have parents who were involved and have resources more than kids who don't. And so those are project-based, things. So I just want us to keep that in mind, to not get too far. Whatever we're told, I know that we can do what we need to do, just like with the District of Choice. We were told we could do it, and we did it, and hardly any other district in California did it, and we did a good job of it. I mean, not without its tweaks, and so with the framework of education we're getting, we need to make sure that we have the expectations and that we do what we know works, and we use those kinds of things that are suggested in their place and not in a widespread situation across all grades and levels. And we need to make sure that we do a good job that includes all kids. That's what we're talking about, is giving all kids access. I'm off my soapbox now.
Mrs. Lock-Dawson, if I can maybe take off a little bit from Mrs. Codd's opening comment here at the opening part of what she was talking about, and that this what appears to be to many this disconnect between the new standards and the curriculum, or if I can even simplify it more to say the instructional material. So, and I know this is going to be an uphill battle. I know this is an uphill battle for the state. I've personally heard the governor say we don't need new instructional materials to support Common Core. And I think in the simplest of thinking process, he's right. We have a good math book, a good series of math books, let's say. And let me just use this as an illustration. Something that we need to resolve here locally. We have a math adoption at our elementary schools right now. Some like it, some don't like it, but let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that it's most adequate and our teachers are used to it, and that doesn't mean we don't need ongoing professional development. But with the new standards, we have a disconnect between some standards that today are at that are today at fourth grade, that tomorrow will be at third grade. But the third grade text doesn't cover them. The fourth grade text covers them. And so for our teachers, we can spend a lot of time and effort on PD to say, when you get to this unit in third grade, you got to go ask your fourth grade colleagues for the materials or what have you, because it's in their materials. But what do we do for the student? Because we've got these textbooks that are all bound in a certain order, right? But the new standards aren't in that same sequence, year by year or even unit by unit in how they build. So do we toss what we have and go out and spend $3, $4, $5 million on a new adoption? And yet the Common Core state funding, the one-time funding, doesn't contemplate that at all. So I think in part that's a little bit about to put into really what we're going to have to deal with over the next couple of years as we work through and implement that. Either we're going to grossly, in my opinion, overburden our teachers to figure that all out and spend hours at the copy machine copying that fourth grade unit for a third grade teacher, or are we going to spend millions replacing it? And it's not just the textbook, it's the PD, it's the professional development has to go with that, and one more burden on our teachers to learn a whole new series. we have to figure out how to balance all that. And those are obviously conversations we're going to have as Judy and others on our instructional team lead us through the Common Core process. We are going to have to figure those things out without killing off the folks that we are so dependent on 7 hours a day to work with our kids.
And to be, I think, also conscious of avoiding rigidity too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the whole purpose and one of the spirit of LCAP and the spirit of Common Core both are that teachers should be allowed to do their jobs and do them professionally. So we don't want to necessarily be heavy-handed in standardizing everything either.
But we want to support them.
I know. So I think as long as we've got, I don't know if there are plans to keep our steering committee in place, or if are we going to keep part of our...
They had a very specific charge. Remember, we're going to have to do this every year.
Yeah.
So whether we use a steering committee to help with that annual process or not, but their charge actually ends in May with some final work that we'll be meeting with them, not Wednesday, whatever comes after Wednesday, Thursday, right, of this week. We meet with them again, and one of our questions to them is how they want to structure that next meeting, which is to look at the draft and so on. And so we will certainly have to come back here in a matter of months. We're barely going to get this done. We'll be back before you in a matter of months to talk about how do we do now the annual update process. Is that with a steering committee? Is that with a mini version of all the work we've just done? How do we go about that? And nobody's thinking about that right now because we're all just focused on getting through it the first time.
Well, I think you are thinking about it, though,
Yes.
which is good.
Yeah.
To me, I think one of the most important things is I think we know this is all new and it's fraught with pitfalls. And as much as we can be responsive and have a feedback loop and be adaptable and fix things as they come up and have feedback and providing it, not just like Tom said, not just the one-shot deal with the parents this time around, but that it's ongoing, teachers, parents, community. So, and have feedback loops built into our development process. I think that's going to be key.
And the process does assume that we do that. Remember, it is a 3-year plan with 1-year review and 1-year updates. And those review and updates go back through the annual oversight process each time with the County Office of Ed. So we will have to do that. And I think what's really important that just kind of clicked with me is one of the things and that we may want to be thinking about with respect to even an LCAP goal is LCAP. How do we put the process, how do we put the support structure in place to do this on an ongoing basis? And that will be important because we've put a lot of effort into it this first go-round. We do know that those annual updates should not take as much effort, but that gets back to quality too. Do we want to continue to put as much effort into it every year or only every 3 years? And I know there's even been Gina and I've slightly had this dialogue, and I've had it with some others at the state. There is actually there's some misunderstanding, and I'm not sure what the right understanding is. Are these 3-year rolling plans? Are they 3-year plans with some annual updates, and then you really redo it every 3 years, or do you really redo it every year? There's some interpretation things there that we're going to need to get some clarity from the state board staff on what the real intent was.
Yeah, and I think also I'm not interested in birthing more sacred cows as much as we can, keep them in calf-like form and herd them along and shape them. And that's the beauty of those
frequent updates and reviews is that hopefully we can keep them from being a sacred cow.
I will say that the coffees with the principals that I've been having and going out to the schools, those have been very, very helpful, and parents are eager and happy to participate. So just any of those are just, I think they're just little mini things, but they've been very useful. So
so if I can at least pull a couple things based on your comments, maybe try to pull those together and kind of seek your for lack of a better term, your permission for us to go spend some real quality time with staff on a couple of these. The first is maybe reaffirming your commitment to literacy by third grade or by the end of third grade. And there's probably a number of things that fall into that were based on your comments. Certainly hiring the best, paying the best, and the professional development that goes with that is not just limited to literacy by third, but that's key for our primary grade teachers, certainly. The whole issue of site support has a role there with respect to that. How we support our schools, both at the school site and otherwise, help in that arena as well. Both Mr. Hunt and Mr. Lee mentioned class size reduction. Class size reduction probably is not a need as much as it is a strategy to achieve or to close a gap. And so the whole idea of class size reduction in its support of early literacy, in its support of early numeracy, will be probably an important idea there. I've already mentioned the professional development. So there's several things that fit nicely under that already existing board goal that as a district we're very committed to. I think the same is true when we switch topics from literacy to the numeracy, and I already mentioned that. But the whole idea of science and math, specifically math and at the elementary school. So when we talk about some struggles with algebra, we know it doesn't start in 7th grade and 8th grade that kids start to struggle with that. It starts in 4, 5, and 6, and it's our quality of time in 4, 5, and 6 on math in preparation for algebra is clearly a need the district has, and I think some of you touched on it, was maybe didn't really call out algebra preparation itself, but certainly some of that. The whole area of choices and how we pull that together, how we continue to expand, and that is very important. It kind of overlays several things. It certainly overlays early literacy, especially for our English learners. We see some great success with dual language immersion with our English learner population, and so how do we expand that in a reasonable way? Already just this morning had a conversation about how do we kick off a DLI preschool, like Mr. Lee was mentioning, and because remember we start normally at kindergarten, we'll start with a preschool at a particular school, and then we grow that to kindergarten and 1st grade and 2nd grade down the road. And how do we, I'm not sure we can do 4 more in one fall, but certainly how do we get on a, how we get on course for expanding that. And so the whole choices piece probably becomes an overlay to some other things, such as academic preparation. The whole area of counseling and how we fit all those pieces together is clearly something we heard over and over from our community. You've all expressed those today as well in some form. You talked about several of you talked about preschool in a couple times, but again, I don't know that that's a goal and a need as much as it is a mechanism to help meet a need such as the early literacy and the early start with numeracy, although preschool clearly is a focus on literacy from a skill perspective.
Can I just ask real quickly, how many, we do have a lot of preschool programs at our elementary schools, and they're all need-based, correct? Either we have state and Head Start.
So they are all means-based, meaning that the parent has to qualify based on means, yes.
But we do have, how many do we have? We have quite a few.
22, where's Laura?
I guess I'll try that.
Yeah, 800 kids. I think it's between Head Start and preschool, it's 22.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
On preschool, Mike, I mean, what are the realities of the physical campus challenges that we would face? I mean, great, rah-rah for preschool, but where are we going to put them?
So is a challenge, especially when we talk about class size reduction in the same sentence, because we don't have space to move to full class size reduction under the new 24-to-1 K3 as an example. We will be short space. And we've already begun to address that. We have 2 schools that would be short space if we were to start that motion for next fall. We've already started to address that. That would be class size moving from example 28 to 26 next year, We already have schools we couldn't do that at because of a lack of space.
Okay.
So we've identified those, and I believe Dr. Lewis has that on the next operations committee's agenda to start talking about that. But we're working on that, not to let any time slip by, because in that arena every day right now counts for us. So how we do that with preschool, we are going to be somewhat limited. So there are some other ways to look at it. We typically don't want to ever operate a state preschool or a federal Head Start program off-site, off one of our campuses, because of the administrative burden of that. Basically, we have to have a principal there, and we don't want to do that. But we could operate some RUSD preschools in a whole new model that we create ourselves and just subject ourselves to community licensing. And now we have the flexibility to do that with our funds that we didn't used to have. Because most of the funds we used to get in their various categorical arenas were K-12 focused. Preschool wasn't included. Today we don't have those same restrictions. And so the goal would be, instead of using those funds like we have historically for, say, student interventions, we wouldn't need the intervention because we wouldn't have the gap, because we honored the zero gap at birth, which I think was Mr. Lee's point, and we kept it at zero in those early years all the way up. And so looking at both fee-based, subsidized, and more traditional means-based RUSD preschools, those potentially could be off-site, although again, that gets into facility issues that we want to be sensitive to, and into rents potentially and all that. So it is a topic that needs some careful study in the context of facility planning.
And are we not restricted by the Field Act?
No, especially in a community licensing only environment. No.
Okay. Is there any, I'll ask the dumb question, is there any online aspects of preschool?
Certainly there's some technology aspects. I don't know that I'd go as far as purely virtual. Using technology as a tool in those settings, absolutely, and we see that already. We deploy technology in our preschools here in RUSD already. Mm-hmm. So continuing that, but I don't know that I would naturally go towards only virtual, and I'll tell you why. One of the skills we focus on in preschool is the idea of community and getting along and how you play nicely in the sandbox together. So skills we often think about as kindergarten skills, but really we start them in preschool. And that's difficult to do even in the best of the virtual sandboxes, if you will.
So, but are you sort of, not predicting, Mike, but you're going to say we're going to have a real challenge, this old district is, doing class size reduction at our K3 and doing preschool. We're going to have to choose one or the other?
No, I wouldn't suggest you have to choose one or another. It's the timing of the two and how much of each you can do in any given year. Okay. So as an example, going from 28 to 26, grades 1, 2, and 3. K's already at 24 with some special provisions.
Right.
Okay, 1, 2, and 3, we have, Haley, you're going to have to help me, 2 schools that have immediately being fall. And the second one or third one the following year? There will be 6 additional. Thank you. At 26 or moving the next step? At 24 there would be. Okay. So for next year we have 1 school that we cannot accomplish the move from 28 to 26.
Okay.
The following year we would have 6 schools that we could not accomplish the next logical move of 26 to 24.
Okay.
So at those, let's talk about those 7 schools just for the sake of discussion. At those 7 schools, we would really be shooting ourselves in the foot to be also talking about preschool at those 7 schools at the same time. Is that?
Yeah.
But we have 23 other elementary campuses we could be talking about preschool, although that's not a fair statement because some of those other 23, we could just barely getting by with 24. They may not have another open room. We'll have to look at that scale or that matrix and see what it looks like. So all I'm saying is we wouldn't be introducing 30 new preschool classes and reducing class size by another 4 over the next couple of years without making millions of dollars in facility additions.
And that, I assume, what Haley's describing, though, she's saying that we have exhausted the normal applications of modulars I mean, to accommodate it, we'd have to get monies from the public to go up or something, I imagine.
Well, so I think this is your question, and if I miss it,
No.
just say so.
Who knows?
We will have to spend money, and right now that would be out of the general fund
Uh-huh.
for those additional classrooms, because we're not projecting now an increase in developer fees, and there's no state program for that, and there's no bond program right now for that. So the only source left would be the general fund.
General fund, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Lee also has a question.
On this class size reduction numbers you're mentioning, are these the state
That's right.
mandated class size reduction numbers you're referencing?
24 is.
By what year?
So we have to make progress each year. This gets a little technical, but the progress we have to make is based on the added funding we get. So let me give you an example. Next year, the current projection is that we will close the LCFF funding gap by 28% next year. So from where we're at today to what was originally an 8-year target, we'll close that by 28% next year. That's the current Department of Finance, State Department of Finance projection. That means we also have to close the gap between our current 28-to-1, grades 1, 2, and 3, to 24-to-1, that 4-student gap. We'd have to close that gap by 28%, which is, somebody'd have to do the math, but probably about 1.3 kids. So the question is, does it make sense to do it mathematically at 1.3, or does it make sense to roll that up and do it at 2? So we have to do that unless we have an agreement locally with our bargaining unit that sets a different standard or gives us some other timing, if you will. And we will be sitting down to have that conversation. We have an alternative agreement for kindergarten, as an example. And maybe, potentially using some of that exact same language and applying it grades 1 through K through 3, may make sense and may be acceptable. I don't know. We haven't, in fairness to the association, we haven't had that conversation yet. And from the state, you'll hear the state say we have 8 years to get to 24, but you have to make that progress each year. And in some respects, we did the right thing for our kids last year when we moved from 30 to 28. But see, we only had to really go from 30 to 29.6 or something. And it resets each year to wherever you start. So where we're at this year, we have to make another 28%. They don't give us credit for for making more progress last year than we were obligated to. We don't get a credit for that. So.
Thanks, Mr. Fine.
So those are some themes, trying to get back to.
Yeah. Do you have more that you want to wrap up with then? Are you
those are the
finished
ones
with them?
that stand
Okay.
out. I think there's probably a couple others that at the
Yeah,
end
no,
here
you
I didn't
can-
get a chance to
Go
code.
ahead.
But those are certainly the ones that we would want to organize and bring back to you. And so if I can, just to kind of wrap up, would be to say that on the 21st, on our study session on April 21st, will be the first time that you would start to see some of these themes and goals in the format of the LCAP template itself. Which is going to be time-consuming along not just coming up with the goal and the actions, but really to organize it as Gina spoke earlier in this needs-driven format. And so we will bring those back to you in a draft form, and then certainly take additional input from you on additional thoughts you have and reflections you have at that time. The goal would be on your May 5th regular board meeting, which is 2 weeks after that, that we would have pretty darn close to a finished draft plan for you to be looking at and for you to bless before we go back to the community. Because remember, the next step of this, once we have the draft, is we have to go back to certain stakeholder groups and review that draft with them and solicit their comments.
Okay. Mrs. Cloud?
I would just add to that mix, you know that it's in the board goal, and among the board members here that have mentioned it, is the CTE component and the technical
Thank you.
education at the upper levels. It's kind of like, K3 and then opportunities at the higher level. I just want to make sure you.
And thank you, Mrs. Cloud. That's actually one of the things I marked on here and I skipped over. So at Wednesday's instructional subcommittee meeting, on your agenda is a report on the work we've done. Mrs. Cowder has led a team of folks over the last month on the state's new linked learning initiative, and we've applied to be members of a consortium here in the western Riverside County area for a $15 million grant, and then also last week applied on our own for a grant under that new program as well. And so we're very excited about some of the topics that we've been allowed to apply for, whether we get them or not. They include lots of things in the theme, I guess, of what Mr. Hunt and Mr. Lee and others talked about. So it would be the new century's auto shop approaches, maybe a focus on aviation mechanics as opposed to vehicle mechanics. I think it's important to know those are not substitutes, I think, in anybody's mind, including the state's, for A through G. We think a student that's going to go work on a Boeing 777 has to meet the A through G types of math requirements. They won't be successful otherwise, and those kinds of things. But starting those pathway kinds of conversations, expanding the academy concept with industry support, and we are limited to certain industries that we can partner with. They have to be industries that are job-producing industries in our region, and that would be the Riverside-San Bernardino region. So the committee's going to hear that on Wednesday, an update on what we've done.
Well, I would just say yes. I'm married to a technician, and yes, it's all about writing, math, physics, all of those things. So yes, don't let us forget that.
Mr. Hunt.
Yeah, to that, though, Michael, and A to G, Ms. Ari, if you would look at the Arlington High School transcript, whatever, where former principal Antonio Garcia got up and had some very passionate things to say. And one of them was that we're all insisting on A to G, but if by this time, and this was a couple months ago, or a month ago at least, Johnny hasn't got it, then he's out of it. And I'm still trying to understand that a little bit, that if he falls behind, he can't catch up. And how what Mr. Fine is insisting that, and I don't mean to put words, Mike, but that we be A to G. Antonio had some real life dilemmas that I would like to understand the strategies to take on to that.
Completely agree. I don't think, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, I don't think he would be saying we should not be looking at A through G as a goal.
No, sir, I don't think so either.
He's just simply saying we have some students that need that extra support, and you see that reflected not only in comments about career tech, but you also see that in the most frequent comment, which had to do with support for individual students.
Well, what he was saying to me was high school's like a football game has 4 quarters, and the guy twisted his ankle in the opening kickoff, and now he's out for the rest of it. So how do we meet the platitude of the ideal you have of A to G when those reality type things are going on?
That's part of the Heritage Plan that we began to work with this year, and on one subgroup of students, and starting to understand why do they miss it by 1 class and 2 classes and 3 classes, where do they get off, and what we can control about that, and what we can control easily about that, and what we control that is more difficult and therefore requires more resources to control about that. So completely
Can I also
that.
chime into Mr. Hunt as well? There's a big
I was
push.
going to make a brilliant observation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Here's my brilliant observation. We did have a push during the Blueprint for Action that Dr. Ermert was leading with Ms. Simmons on 6-year planning, which begins in 7th and 8th grade. Because if you take algebra your 8th grade year, it gives you a different setup for high school math.
Right,
so there are opportunities other than just catching them in high school. So hopefully we'll be implementing some of those things as we move forward. But give me your brilliant observation that I interrupted.
No, and I think Antonio's observations, I appreciated them. I didn't quite understand them all, but I appreciate it because it was really was almost like he'd been freed from the RUSD yoke, and he was able to speak freely. And I want to, I made a joke that only Mike heard up here, is that, the oracles up here have spoken. I kind of feel like a Greek oracle and on high, and you brought all this to me. Daryl, this is your business. This isn't mine. I want to, and I think you and I have a relationship enough, or Dee, or Kelman, that I think this board right now, we really need a conversation with all of you. I don't mind you pulling me aside and saying, hey, you really were off base on that, or you really forgotten this, or, this is what you guys train for. It's not what an elected board usually trains for, Mrs. Cloud aside. And so if there ever was a time for a community conversation, and not to, just because we sit a foot and a half higher than you do out there, not talk to us, this isn't it. You need to really be chiming in and helping us. We respect all of you. You're where you are, Dee, because you earned it. So I'd want to hear from you, and from Judy, and from Bill, and Ms. Simmons. And this is a time, and I really did pay attention to what, at these LCAPs, what our professionals were saying. Particularly the teacher at King, boy, she's tough. Your drama teacher at King. She had some great observations and insights, and I really respected that and wanted to soak in more of that. But you're the ones we see the most, so I would just encourage you to help us at this time. Don't make us, otherwise I am, Karnak up here. So that's my observation. So.
On that, Mr. Hunt, can I also just ask if there is any comment from anybody what have we overlooked up here that anybody, or that Mike has captured most of what we said, but does anybody want to come forward and say anything that we might have missed?
We could just call on people.
Yeah.
Like teacher, right?
So if I can, before you call, just give them a chance to run out the back door.
I'm not putting anybody.
But although this isn't true for everybody sitting here, the majority of the folks are here because they're part of what I assembled as the drafting committee. To listen to your ideas, and as the professionals, now to go work on those. And to be back here, they don't know this yet because they don't meet till tomorrow, but to basically, within a week, be back here with a draft related to some of these things so that we can start working through those and get those to you ahead of the 21st meeting. And so that's, like I said, not true for everybody, but certainly for many of them. And I think they're the folks that will add exactly the value, Mr. Hunt, you're looking for.
Do you have something to bring forth, Dr. Ermert? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lock-Dawson. I would just comment in terms of, I'm a little disappointed in, and I'm not sure what context Mr. Garcia mentioned that if Johnny misses an A through G requirement in his freshman year, that he's out of the game, because that's certainly not the way we have it planned, as Mrs. Lock-Dawson explained regarding our blueprint for action at the secondary level. I think we're in a wonderful time, and we have a wonderful opportunity to provide so many more options for kids than we have been able to in the past, whether it be personalized learning, whether it be expanding the summer school that we cut back so drastically because of financial worries, whether we negotiate a 7th or 8th period day that would create more space in student schedules. We have thought about this, and we do believe that, as Mrs. Cloud alluded to, her husband uses the skills that are part of the A through G components on a daily basis. Everyone does. And to really, Mr. Hunt, you commented that you, and Mr. Lee commented that every child should be able to go to college if they want. Certainly, we believe that our USD students deserve that privilege, deserve that opportunity, and we will find ways that Johnny doesn't get lost in his freshman year or his sophomore or junior year. That's our commitment.
Thank you, Dr. Ermert. Mrs. Cloud?
I would just,
Then you come on down. Come
Yeah.
on down.
Can I just piggyback on that? That's what we're looking for. These technical fields are technical. They're high end. It's not like you can just go out and get a job as a computer programmer or a plumber or something. You have to have the background. And so what I'm saying is all of the jobs that provide a good wage actually have a lot of technical like through G kind of stuff in it. And if you don't have that, then that's what you're going to not be able to get those kinds of jobs that provide living wages. And so that's the concern. That's why some of the A through G skills and education is required in some of the technical stuff.
I think we need to make sure that the teacher gets across the relativity of the A to G to that life skill he wants to do. I remember the kids at Arlington saying, I really don't know why I'm taking algebra, and I want to learn how to do my own taxes. And I thought, okay, there's a connection, sweetheart. But anyhow, thank you, ma'am.
Okay,
Mrs.
thank you.
Lock-Dawson, members of the board, thank you for allowing us to come up and give our input. Speaking as an elementary principal, I just want to thank you, Mr. Hunt, first for being the first one of the board members to express an interest in the documentation that both secondary and elementary principals provided. I wasn't present for the secondary process, but I feel confident that it was developed in the same collaborative manner that the elementary process was. And I've heard several of you mention having looked at that carefully, and I feel confident in saying that every elementary principal had an opportunity for extensive input. And so you do have that available to you in a hard copy form.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
We did give that weight. I think Ms. Cloud said that. We did.
And Mrs. Cloud mentioned it again today, too, yes. Thank
You
you.
guys are the master sergeants out there. We give it weight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to come forward?
Come on, Hanson.
Okay. Daryl, Tom's pushing on you. He's picking on you. It's okay.
All right. Well,
Look, he's
I
coming. Look,
understand it.
don't all rush at once.
See, in church, they don't call the sinners out of their seats. You're supposed to just come up on your own.
Wow. Okay.
Right, Renee?
To like Mr. Fine said, as we gather your input, and I think there were a couple things I wrote down here to take back as we look and start developing these plans. I was really interested because I didn't catch the preschool conversation, and being that I spend my days in the high school world, but as a father of two kindergartners, some of the comments you made, Mr. Lee, on the kindergarten and the preschool aspects of trying to get in, and my wife and I faced that same challenge as we were trying to find preschools for my twins, who are now sitting at Franklin. So I was intrigued by those. I found really interesting, we had a conversation about side help and getting, because I'm a firm believer that if it's not monitored, it's not happening, and getting more opportunities to get into classrooms and do some things. But the paperwork we gave you, that the secondary principals and that we all got together and looked at and put our work in and our 2 cents in those documents, those two were very collaborative and very good conversation, where we all kind of, for the first time since I've been in the district, got together as a 7-12 group and looked and said, what are our needs and what are our areas of concerns? And that's where that's where that document came from. And I think that for us, that kind of says exactly what we thought and what we needed at our school sites. And it was a great process. The LCAP meetings and things I thought were amazing. But the highlight of this whole thing has been sitting down with the other principals and hearing every individual story of what we all needed. And that's what's in that documentation that you were given.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Appreciate it. Well, if nobody else has any other comments, I think you have your work cut out for you. Of course, the challenge is always in execution and implementation. It's great to talk ideas. It's great to talk esoteric things, but I know you all have a big task ahead of you. So I think what I'd like to do is just, Mr. Fine, if you have nothing else, I'll move on to our conclusion and ask if any of our board members have any comments that they would like to add other than what we've said today. Anybody? Mr. Lee?
Just listening to everyone talk just spurned a couple ideas, and I'll go beyond. I'll give you some extra credit. Mr. Fine beyond my 3. With developing some sort of a mentorship program. I don't know what that would look like or how that would be administered in terms of cost, but in terms of our foster youth and some of our students that kind of get off track, having somebody that kind of checks in on them that's maybe not in their school world every day, someone that they can relate to from their life experience, and helping them figure out how they got where they are today, I think that would be helpful. And then again, and I think I mentioned at the last meeting, and I hate to make more work for this group, but what would really help me, I don't know about you 3, is we've mentioned a lot of ideas, and they're all really expensive. And if I would have some sort of idea, like a menu almost, like this is what this costs, and if you tweak it by this number, like if you have 1 DLI classroom versus 2 DLI classrooms, and if that tweaks the class size reduction by 1 or 2, that would help me make priority decisions in terms of what I'd want that plan to look like. I don't know if that's possible, but even creating like a rubric, it's tweaking one.
That is what the template does, and so that's why that is what the template in part does. It's element 6, or I think it was. I think they changed the order a little bit, but so that's why it's important that when we start to bring this back to you on the 21st, why I even made the comment that you're going to start to see it now in the template format, because we'll get the opportunity then to put in, and at that point it would be a very rough number, but you'll start to see that this need, we're recommending we fill this need by doing the following kinds of things, and here's kind of the price tags associated to those. So that's why putting it in that format it will be very valuable to you.
Okay. Anybody else? Mr. Hunter, Ms. Cloud?
I want to echo what Mr. Hanson said. If it isn't being monitored, it ain't happening. The press doesn't know what's going on here today. Not that I want press, but I think we've had these public meetings. This is sort of, and Mr. Fine is welcome to counter if this is not the right time, but we need to let the public know what our discussions are about, what some of these priorities that we're bringing up. We need to keep the dialogue, and that means that Mrs. Paul or others are going to have to do contributed content. If you read the paper this weekend and just the story on the proposed ballot measure on RNC, the whole thing was contributed content, and they printed it. So obviously they're taking things like that, and I know Mrs. Paul's got her hands full. But however we intend to do this, if the press isn't going to be here, we need to be before the people and getting their feedback, so we don't become an echo chamber of education alone.
So, Mr. Hunt, actually, that is the next step in the process, and it's required by the law. So after May 5th, when we come back to you, hopefully with a little bit more finished, we then take that draft and go back out. That's in the process chart, those 3 circles on the right before the 3 squares. The first group we're going to go back to is our steering committee, because in theory, as a group, they'll be the most knowledgeable about it. Then we do a variety of community reviews, and at this Thursday's steering committee meeting, we're going to ask them to help us determine what the format of those will be. Do we have? We had set ourselves up to go specifically to the groups that the law requires us to, and then to have some general community meetings where we share the draft plan and get some feedback. Or are we going to take a slightly different approach to that? But that actually is the process that the law requires us, and is the next step. And with respect to the press enterprise, I've had an ongoing conversation with them about this. They're not interested in this. They don't consider this the story. They consider the finished product. So they saw the beginning of the process, which there was an article on, and they see the finished product at the end as their story. And so they are intentionally not covering the process through its steps. And we've had an ongoing dialogue about whether that is short-sighted or not, but it is also not only about Riverside. Remember, everybody around us is doing this, but we're all doing it a little different. We're all at different points in the process as well, and they intend to cover it more regionally when we're all done in June, basically.
Well, it should be on our webpage then, I would think. Summarizations.
Everything we've given you so far is there, and as we go through this next step, all of that will be there as well.
And Mike, just because it's in real time, I have to tell you, it's much better than when I first got here. But as long as you, particularly Dr. Lewis, use these small fonts and these all this. I either have to turn around and be rude to you to really see it well. So I think we've got to be thinking about it's time for screens, whether they need to be inset or something that has what's up there, because I'm getting older and my eyesight, I mean, it's really, literally I can't read that. And I know I have the handout, yeah, usually, but you do have things that move back and forth, and this is one, but so once you begin to think about that with all the other free time you have.
Thanks, Mr. Fine. Thank you. All right. If nobody else has any other comments, I think I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Our next regular meeting is on April 14th. This says we're going to be meeting at 4:30, but I think we're going into closed session at 4 on the 14th, aren't we? Okay. So we'll be in closed session 4, and then our meeting open session will start at 5:30. Thank you, everybody, for coming on this beautiful afternoon, and welcome back, and thanks for your work.
Joyce, I got something for you. Joyce, I have something for you.